Hello, my name is Justin Butler, and I'll be presenting my interpersonal communication plan for HSCO508, Studies in Interpersonal Communication. To start, I'm going to be defining interpersonal communication. For me, interpersonal communication is defined by 4 different factors: the message being conveyed from one party to another or in a group setting, what's actually trying to be said and trying to be transmitted from one party to another, the tone in which it's being said, whether it's being said with an angry tone, for example, or with sarcastic undertones, the nonverbals of what someone is saying, whether their body language is saying one thing while their words are saying another, or whether they're being dismissive with their body language, for example, and in the setting in which it takes place. I believe all 4 of those factors are a good definition of what interpersonal communication consists of. So today we're going to be talking about my personal behavioral blend and background information that may be affecting my ability to communicate in interpersonal settings, some communication barriers that maybe exist in my way of being able to effectively communicate, some personal goals and strategies of how to overcome those, putting that strategy in action with implementation of practical ideas to overcome them, and then we're going to recap and talk about some resolutions to go forward. For the behavioral blend, once I took the DISC assessment, Carbonell 2008 just told me that I have a mixture of the D, the I, and the S, dominance, influencing, and stabilizing, which basically boils down to what I got from that is that I'm a people person, and whether I'm a follower or a leader in a given setting, I do have the ability to influence people, and that can be a good thing or a negative thing in interpersonal communication. So I really need to take on the task of being an effective interpersonal communicator so that I'm guiding people as a talker and I'm being an effective listener for them so that I can continue to be a positive influence in my professional and personal settings. To go over some background information about me that may be a factor in my personal communications. Emotional management has always been something that I've struggled with in the past, and I've been worked really hard in the present to overcome, not allowing my emotions to get the better of me and affect my communication with in my personal life, with my family, with my spouse, and in personal settings, with my coworkers and my bosses. I was very conflict avoidant as well. Tough conversations often get put off by me in an attempt to hopefully sweep it under the rug instead of just effectively dealing with it and talking through it professionally or with good wisdom and discretion. And then from some personal betrayals and personal failings in the past of myself, I do have a lack of trust of others that I'm working through, and that can affect my ability to be an effective listener and can affect my ability as a talker if I'm not trusting that the message is being received by the listener. So that goes straight into some barriers in my path. Some barriers in my path that I identified are cynicism. Just not being very confident that I'm effective listening to others, or I'm being able to be effectively communicate, or kind of not seeing the purpose in it. Some hesitancy, like I said before, avoiding those conversations, putting them off, or being hesitant to initiate conversations that need to happen. Allowing self-defeating thoughts to get in my head before I'm trying to listen to someone or trying to speak. Channeling those emotions, as I spoke about previously, into positive ways instead of negative. That can be a task for me that is a barrier in my path at this time. And listening without interrupting is a real practical barrier in my path that I definitely need to work on overcoming. So some personal growth goes with that, with the emotions, avoiding decisions when emotional, trying to make a decision when I'm not in an emotional state. And that may involve setting boundaries to help myself identify when I'm being emotional and maybe working through that. Listening, trying to listen with improved communication, that's always the goal, and having more empathy for talkers, that's the goal. With hesitation, I want to always communicate with purpose as a goal and be less avoidant of conversations. And then some goals, further goals, avoiding negative assumptions about others, maybe help deal with that cynicism as well as those negative thoughts. Engaging in positive self-care, whether it's taking time to make sure I'm recharged and refreshed so that I can be a good and effective speaker and an effective listener, as well as seeking feedback from others to make sure that I'm growing as a listener and as a speaker. So practical strategies to do that with the emotions. I thought of taking a pause when I am emotional and not allowing the emotions to blurt out or burst out without restraint, or rescheduling the conversation to overcome the emotions and to have the conversation take place in a different setting. For listening, always clarifying the message from the talker, asking additional questions, and checking my initial reactions to avoid allowing them to show up on my face or in the words I say initially, so that I can respond with a measured response instead of an initial reaction. With hesitation, avoid overthinking, stick to the facts, and try to have a purposeful conversation, and just jump right into it and try to pick a good setting and pick a good time and get the conversation done that needs to happen instead of avoiding it. Another strategy is to dismiss assuming thoughts, to kind of deal with that cynicism. Don't assume anything about others or whether they're really listening. Just go into it with an open mind and go into it with positive energy. And that goes right into engaging positively towards myself. I talked about recharging others, recharging myself and making sure I'm refreshed before communication takes place. And then inviting constructive criticism at any point opportunity, maybe from a third party who witnessed the communication and wasn't a part of it, or maybe someone, a trusted peer or colleague or mentor. To how am I going to implement these? For the emotional regulation, from Schultz and Badzinski 2015, I took to seek to resolve conflict without allowing the emotions to dictate the conversation and inflame the conversation past the point where it's the emotions driving the conversation and not the content of the conversation and effective communication. From Peterson 2015, I took bring peace to the conversation by being able to share feelings and thoughts without going into attack mode. So try to communicate my thoughts and feelings effectively without feeling the need to defend myself or attack others' positions. Going from listening well, for implementing that, I took from Peterson 2015 to listen to criticism without rushing to defend myself and try to digest the words that are being said by the speaker. Again, from Peterson 2015, set a goal prior to any conversation to clarify any mixed or unclear messages transmitted by the speaker by asking questions. From Schultz and Badzinski 2015, choose a setting conducive to conversational success and avoid having conversations in negative venues that could influence the communication. For France and Weichel 2020, avoid conclusions prior to hearing the whole conversation unfold, and avoid conclusions prior to letting the other party speak their heart and mind about the situation. For the next implementation about avoiding hesitancy, from Schultz and Badzinski 2015, I took deny attempts to cocoon when my desire is to run from conflict and tough conversations. Try to avoid that and deny those attempts at what I want to cocoon and run away from those conversations and just get over that. And from Schultz and Badzinski 2015, I took avoid communicative perfectionism in order to ensure that communication is taking place without too much time passing. So not worrying if the conversation is going to be perfect and just getting into it and trying to do better each time. And then from Schultz and Badzinski 2015 again, I took focusing on a priority to love my neighbor by not avoiding hard conversations that need to happen. For the assumptions, the implementation is assumptions can be deadly, so we're going to do these two things. With France and Weichel 2020, never assume a meaning behind a speaker's words if it's not clear, and then we're going to ask questions to clarify that. And then from France and Weichel 2020 again, I took do not assume all signs, verbal and nonverbal, are indicators that vindicate assumptions that I'm maybe feeling or thinking. Instead, interrogate the reality with wisdom and discretion. And then going on to unloading negative thoughts, and the implementation for me for that is from Schultz and Badzinski 2015, I took finding a balance that effectively avoids overburdening myself with the troubles of others while simultaneously being able to be an empathetic listener. So the balance of being an empathetic listener while not being overburdened by the problems of others or the issues going on. And from Schultz and Badzinski 2015, I took guarding against complete selflessness by taking time for prayer, leisure, and recovery to ensure the care of myself before I try to help others. And from Carbonell 2008, I took focusing on the moment and dismissing overemphasis on the opinions of others to avoid mental burnout. In the last implementation, seeking constructive critique, from Schultz and Badzinski 2016, I took seek encouragement from others to build on the positives of positives being exhibited by myself in interpersonal communication. From Schultz and Badzinski 2016 again, dismiss attempts at flattery and request honest but constructive feedback to improve communication. And from Peterson 2015, avoid disagreeing with feedback, and shut down attempts to defend oneself against critiques that are negative. So just to recap, we talked about my personal behavioral blend and background info that may affect my interpersonal communication, some barriers that may be present to that effective communication, some personal development goals and strategies to overcome those barriers, and some implementation plans to reach those goals. So with that being said, does anyone have any questions? Thank you.